which boxes you're going to type it into, and then making sure those boxes show up on the form. So if it's a purchase order, we have this header, which includes the ship to and other delivery-specific information. If it's a subcontract, then we don't have a header because we don't have delivery information. And pretty much everything else is the same on the data entry screen, that you can define as many or as few line items as you want. It's like we're referring to, you can have one purchase order, all on the same job but different extras, or all on different jobs, or just a single line item. And again, there's a whole bunch of places where you can type stuff in. It's just a question of what information do you need and where do you need it. Yeah. You know, so if you're doing, like some general contractors do lots of subcontracts and they have their 6-page legal language or the AGC form that, you know, we type in the scope of work here, and then when we go to print it, it prints out on the 6-page form with all the legal language already in there. So it's kind of a question of what.
I think we tried that at one point, was to copy all of our subcontract agreement information into one, and we couldn't get it to fit. It only took like the first paragraph, like 250 characters was all you get. You remember when we messed around with that?
But you would have fill-in areas on it, right, where it automatically populates certain areas of the contract through the information put in. So instead of going and changing it to the contract, put it all in there and hit print. It prints it out with everybody's name on it.
Yeah, I'm just printing one out so that I'm actually going to print them for all. Unfortunately, on the commitment entry screen, because it's originally part of job cost and not part of project management, there's not a print preview button built in. So when you're entering the screen, you can't just say print preview. But what I usually do is set up a report that's, here's where we go to enter the subcontract, here's where we go to print it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's an example inside Crystal Reports, which is the report builder. It looks like I didn't type something in right now. I typed in 3002. Typed in the bad job number. And so this is pulling in all the subcontracts from this job. You know, so you can say this subcontract is to this vendor for this dollar amount.
6-page agreement.
No, it's
No?
4 pages per subcontract times.
Oh, I got it. Okay, I see them
8.
all.
But it automatically populates the areas you want to.
Yeah.
You know, so this happens to be a 4-page subcontract.
Which is about what ours is, I think. A little more. But yeah, that would be great. We could get ours in there like that so we can just data entry those tidbits.
Right, because then, you know, like in this example, there's only a few things that are changing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's what's the date of the commitment?
Right. And we're just
Who's
doing
the
that
sub?
Word.
Yep.
Right.
Who's the owner on the job? Who's the architect on the job? What's the scope of work? And then if you're tracking start and end dates, a lot of companies don't put that in the subcontract since it's often subject to change. That you don't know when you want the sub to show up until after they've signed the subcontract. You know, and then it's a couple pages of requirements, and then it's how much are we going to pay you?
Yep. It looks really
Where do you
similar
invoice
to
us?
ours.
Sign here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, this is a
So I've got to put that in.
version of the AGC subcontract, the Minnesota Association of General Contractors. So this contractor took that and renumbered a couple things and tweaked a couple things, and so they don't have the AGC logo on it anymore, but if you look at them side by side, it's like, this is really similar.
Or it could be probably, what,
TNM on there, and it would automatically put on and just go for work.
whatever the scope of work is.
Yeah, where did you actually type the scopes in? Is it there?
Yeah, so
In that
let's,
agreement?
so let's make this a subcontract. So we're gonna say commitment number 40,000 to sprinkler contractors. It's a subcontract. This is the scope of work. What do you want it to say?
Put in a hanger, anything,
Install hangers?
yeah, install hangers. Then I got one question for you when you get in typing, so you can talk about it.
I can listen and type. I just can't talk
Can you
and
put a
type.
button over on the other side where it's either lump sum or T&M? That populates the contract?
No, but we can add a checkbox to the custom fields.
I'm saying, but you can put it where we could just check T&M or
Right.
lump sum. and
So
it-
on custom fields, we could have either a checkbox or a pull down that says this is a T&M subcontractor,
And
this
it
is a
would-
lump sum
It would
subcontract.
populate the contract.
And then we could have two different versions of the form and it would print out the appropriate one.
Unless they're not to exceed from that subcontractor. We don't have open fields. Correct? Am I with me?
Yeah,
Sorry, I was,
We're not gonna issue a subcontract agreement to somebody that this is T and M on there without the dollars on that.
oh,
Right.
no.
Yeah, so you-
Generally, it's a lump sum, but when you're in an outage situation, and you have, which is the pass-through bill plus 10%, then we would put a T&M, and it would just pass through me, and I'd mark it up.
But you're still
Well.
they're still gonna give you a not to exceed price. But if we get
Every
our
time
contract-
except outages, I don't get not to exceeds in outages, typically, not for a sub.
well,
We
it,
can handle that later.
yeah. And it's also easier from the data entry if you type in a number. So for stuff like that, I usually just type in a number that you know is bigger than they're gonna need. Or say, here's,
We have to put
Because you need to
some kind of
account
an
for
estimate.
it.
right, here's 10,000 and if you go over, then,
So you're saying
Call
put a
me.
number in larger than what I need?
yeah. And then it can be
And
in
we
the system
talked
as a
about
not to
doing that
exceed.
too.
Correct, so we
So
have
that
to
there's
set a
something
guideline.
in there to account for.
Correct, so then we get to the job and we're saying, but if, like he's saying, if we know it's just a T&M, we're billing the customer T&M. Everything that we get from our subcontractors in the T&M, so you're just passing this through
Right.
with the markup. What I mean, I'm getting where now I'm getting where you're at, so that's fine, but still give us a guideline, we still need to put it down.
Right.
Oh, I can do that. I was trying to get a little.
Yeah.
She told me I couldn't do that the other day. So,
No, on the ones where they tell you it's gonna cost $5,000, I don't want you to say, okay, I'll give you a PO for 6.
okay.
Because then when they invoice me for 5, I've got an open balance on a PO that I've gotta go change and close.
Right, it's gonna have to be a discrepancy, and she's gonna have to come to you and say, why are we over, they're billing us 5,000, you have 6,000 in the
Right.
PO.
Okay.
Where is the difference?
Yep.
Why?
Yeah, the T&M ones, I get that, cause you don't know, it's just an ongoing thing.
Okay. We good.
So you can enter dates if you want.
Oh, man.
So in the version you have, there's 4 different flavors of insurance. The new version has those 4 plus 2 that are customizable. So you can see what's already set up in accounts payable of if we know that they have policies and when those policies expire. And then this tracks what are the types of insurance that we need certificates for them to work on this particular job. So all of this will then pre-fill over to the compliance grid as something that's required from this sub on this job. There are additional checkboxes. You can have up to 10 checkboxes here. These like the first, I'm forgetting, there's either 4 or 6 that you can't change the name, and then 4 you can change the name. But again, it all comes down to what do you want to track and what do you want to have print out, and do you really want to come in here and check this right here or somewhere else? So you can say that, you know, if a bond is required, you can specify that here. We can add custom fields, so if we want to have 2 different versions of the subcontract, one that says this is T&M not to exceed, and one that says lump sum, we can have a checkbox here to pick that. There's also some additional information. So item detail tells me the detail for the line item. So you can set a overall retainage percent for the subcontract, or you can have different retainage per line item. And then it also tells you if there have been any change orders, if there's been any invoicing, any payments on this line item. You can also have custom fields at the item level. So if you wanted to track certain information about different line items that might vary from line item to line item, you can define that. Item scope. So you can have additional details of scope of work per line item. And you know, in this example, I'm just saying it's a subcontract for $5,000. That doesn't necessarily apply, but you could have multiple line items, each with additional details.
I just remembered because I highlighted that blue fire protection. When I enter a material purchase order and it says service industrial, and that pulls from either a category or cost code.
It is the cost code that you entered.
If I change that and I keep going and I realize I made a mistake or like in something else, it changes back to service industrial. Is there any way to make it not do that? Especially if you mess let's say you screw the whole PO up and you gotta go change them all. You retype in the descriptions again.
No.
Okay.
You can use the item scope field instead of the description fields and type your descriptions on item scope, and then those will never change. And we can print that box instead of the description column.
Okay, so put that back to fire protection and put hangers in there. I want to see how it looks. That would be kind of annoying to have to hit that box every time, but.
What did I do to reset it? Then you can have an inclusions and exclusions list. The way this subcontract is set up is if you do an inclusion number 0, it's your addenda list. I just want to put a T in inclusion. And you can add your inclusion list if you have one. So we can save all this. And it thought I was starting to enter an extra line, so it was asking me what I was doing for the next line. And now that that's entered, I can go in here and say, show me subcontract number 40,000. It will say, we're doing this on May 15th to sprinkler contractors. Some of the, like we didn't enter a job site address, so it's not showing the job site address. So here's the addenda list that we entered as inclusion number 0 to show up in that. Here's the scope of work. Here's the inclusion list. Here's the item scope. Oh, I entered the item scope on the second line. That's why I thought I was doing a second line. And then it has all the boilerplate language, and then it says here's how much we're going to pay. And again, this is all a template, so whatever your form looks like, we can tweak it to look like that. Or if you say, I want this box to print and this one not to print, we can change that stuff. So that's entering a subcontract.
Quick and easy.
Right, and I like doing it this way so you don't type something up in Word and then it's not in the accounting system until somebody goes in and puts it in.
Yep.
And then, you know, doing it this way, you don't have to worry about typos, and you can be sure it's in the accounting system. And this becomes the easiest way to print it out, because you can say, here are the 5 pieces of information I need to type in, go to my report, print out the 4-page document. You know, that becomes easier than opening it up in Word and going to the different places and editing the text. So it gets everybody using the accounting system more and away from the double entry.
That's what I'm talking about. Shortcuts. Shortcuts.
Yep. All right, so let's do 40,001. This is a purchase order. And it's giving me these warnings because when we entered the estimate, we did not include these cost codes in our estimate.
Oh,
So it's saying you're spending money in codes that aren't set up. Are you sure you want to do that? And because I'm just trying to quickly create some stuff so that we can go work on change orders, I'm saying yes, go ahead and ignore that. But normally you shouldn't. You
why are you
know?
looking at me like that?
Because I think
'Cause
she
you-
realizes you might be
Because
the
you're
only
the
one.
project manager. That's telling you
Every project manager, it ain't
when
just me.
when you did your estimate, you coded it differently than you're coding it now. So figure out how you want to code it and be consistent.
Yeah, okay, okay.
You've
I
got
was giving my list that I will go by.
all right. I'm not saying you're a problem. I'm saying it's a tool to help keep everyone on your page so that other people won't mess up your job.
She keeps me in line.
Okay, so that's entering a subcontract. Do we want to look at things like RFIs, submittals, or do we want to jump right into change orders since we're up to our necks in all the financial stuff anyway?
I think if you want to do the RFIs and that, maybe we could, if Andrew and Tate can come back,
Do that after lunch.
maybe do, yeah. I mean, the change orders has to do with interim job stuff, so we might as well keep going.
Okay. All right, so the change management system has 3 different data entry screens. One that's the change request that we looked at earlier, that's the potential change order or the change order request. And that's the screen that has all the details. So that has the grid, so you can say this is the cost code, this is the cost amount, this is the price amount, this is the subcontract that's affected if this does change. All the details get entered in that change request grid. The change order is for when the customer has approved a change to then document that change. So it sounds like it's less the case for the way you're doing things with the multiple T&M jobs where you can you can move things from one job to the other when you need to rather than doing change orders. But in the other way of working, it's
I'll
the,
still have change orders.
you know, it's the, here's the 5 different things we talked about for scope changes, here's what each of them costs, and then at the end of the month, the owner comes back and says, yeah, go ahead on number 1 and number 4 and number 5, but we're going to hold off on number 2 and 3. that you would go into the change order and say, change request number 1, number 4, and number 5 are all approved this month. Let's update our contract amount so we have more to bill. Let's update our estimate to account for that extra scope. Then the third tool is the commitment change order. So that's when you want to update a purchase order or a subcontract for that sub or vendor to do the additional scope. And so almost everywhere in the system, the word cost refers to dollars that will show up in your job cost estimate. So it's money that you're going to spend. Price refers to dollars that will end up in the contracts module that's available for billing. So it's what you're charging your customer. And there is one exception. There's a column called vendor price, which is the price a vendor quotes to you. So it's what they're charging you, but if you approve that and issue it as a commitment change order, it will become a cost because that's money you're going to pay to your sub. So everywhere else, cost means estimate, price means revenue, except the vendor's price, which is going to be a cost to you if you approve it. So the reason there's the 3 different screens is because of the different workflows. So the way things are supposed to work is you find a problem or an issue or additional scope, figure out what it's going to cost, send the change order request, wait for the owner to approve it. After you get the approval, then you issue change orders to your subs and suppliers, go do the work, and then everybody invoices everybody. What often happens is something comes up, you tell your subs to go take care of it, they go do the work, you find out what it costs when you get their invoice, you then package that all together and send it to your customer as, here's a change order request, and you cross your fingers that the customer approves it so that you can bill the customer.
We'll have field copies signed.
Yeah, so the advantage of having the 3 different screens is you can do it in any order you need to. So you can start with the commitment change order if you need to. You can start with the change request if you need to. You can proceed whether you have the change order or not. So it's all driven by your internal policy and the needs of the job, that it won't, it's good practice that you not proceed with costs if the owner's not going to pay for it, but that's part of the project manager's job, and managing that relationship is, I have the crew on site today. If I have to bring them back next week, it's going to cost double, and I trust this guy to sign the paperwork, so let's go do it.
We'll have it signed on site that day, then give it to her that end of the day, and she'll get it in the system.
Even better.
Just in case they decide not to pay. We've still got it signed.
And so the system doesn't force you to, but I encourage you to always start in the change request screen. And that way your change request log becomes the master log of every issue on the job. So every issue that was approved by the owner, every issue that turned into a sub change, every issue that's an internal adjustment, whatever it is, it'll all be in that master change order log. So, and this just kind of shows that it can get complicated quickly, that each change order can have multiple requests, each request can have multiple line items, each line item can relate to a different sub. So keeping track that request number 3 was approved on owner change order 1, and I need to issue sub change order 4, that it kind of manages all of that for you. So I'm going to go open up the PJ module. So from the contract control menu, we can get out to the contracts module to set up the contract. We can go to the commitment screen to set up our commitments. So we've looked at both of those. And then we have our 3 components of the change management system. So if we start with the change request, and we had started to set up some earlier and didn't actually do anything with them. So I'm just going to open up change request number 1. And you can set it up to say who it's to. You can put a scope of work. Let me fill some of that in. I'm kind of... You can set up your system to pre-fill your own name so that it always says it's from you. So, I'm trying to remember which cost code we put our fake stuff under. Well, so let me quickly enter something, and then I'll go back and show you how the data entry screen is set up to work. So the idea is you can enter the line items, enter the prices. There's a transmittal button right there, so you can do that to automatically add an entry to the transmittal log that you're sending this out. And then again, it's another customizable form that says this is change request number 1, this is the scope, this is the total price. And there's a couple different versions of the form that come with the system. If you need to show the line item detail, you can show the line items.
And show the original contract, and then the change order and the total amount, and as you go, it keeps...
On this, it doesn't, because this is a standalone proposal.
Just the proposed two.
So you're saying, here is some scope, here's how much this scope would cost. When we get to the change order piece, it will say, here was your original contract,
Okay.
Yeah.
here's what you're approving, here's what your revised contract is.
This is step number 1 where you're asking to
Right.
do the change order. Yeah.
Yeah, or when they say, hey, if you do that over there, how much would that cost?
Right.
That you're sending them this piece of paper to say, to do that extra scope would
Because
cost
this
this
is what
much.
really, out of Timberline, they would be signing for your approval to proceed, correct? The bottom?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if they approved that, we would say, okay, the owner approved, so owner change order 1 is now approved. And all it is change request 1. And so now when I print this, and again, I'm going to come back and go through the details.
Right there was where you approved it.
Yeah, so by saving it,
They'd approved it.
it's saying you wouldn't be entering an owner change order if it wasn't approved.
Okay.
Saying here was your original
But there's-
contract, there's your
what you wanted.
previous change orders, this change order, new contract. Because this change order could consist of more than one proposal, so if you had sent 4 change proposals and they approved 2 of them, those would be the 2 line items on this change order. Some customers only ever do it 1-to-1. Some lump them together, and you can do it either way.
Yeah, because we'll have it, anytime they need something done, it's usually put it on site right then, we'll have to come back to the office and fill that in and approve it.
Right. And then the third piece would be to say, okay, I need to tell that sub to go do this additional scope because I have to pay my sub more. So you'd then go into the commitment change order. And it would say, here's all your line items that are hanging out there. We have this line item for commitment 40,000. It was approved as part of owner change order number 1. Let's go ahead and send that line item to that sub. And then this then creates the subcontract change order to hand to the sub. or the purchase order change order if that was a purchase order. So here was your original subcontract, here's how much I'm changing it, here's what it is now. And again, you have the flexibility if you need to issue a subcontract change order without an owner change order in hand, you can still do that. You can come in here and say, I'm going to go ahead and issue a subcontract change order because I need to, because I
You can
bid
do
the
this
job
at
wrong
first.
or something happened. Or I sent the request to my owner, but he's not going to be able to look at it for 2 weeks because he's out of the office, but I know he's going to approve it when he gets back. And I don't want to wait, so I'm going to go ahead. That's not how you work, that's fine.
Bad practice.
It is, but sometimes it happens.
Yeah,
I want at least an initial on a drawing or something.
right.
I know I don't pay.
And actually, let me go back. I'm going to refresh the home page. Oh, but my accounting dates are wacky.
Somebody did spend a lot of time setting up what's in here, even though it's a test module.
Oh yeah, that's the Timberline sample data comes with the system.
Okay. We're in the red, y'all.
Yeah, we have
I'm gonna say we're smile about this.
right.
In the red, I know it.
Yeah, we issued too many commitments compared to our estimate. So because the accounting dates are wrong, it's not going to reflect here. But the nice thing about that is we'll have our approved cost estimate will be here to update our new estimated cost. Our approved commitment change orders will be in here to show our updated commitment. And again, this report is only showing the cost side, not the revenue side, but our projected revenue is now also higher because the owner approved it. So not only does it make it relatively quick to generate all the paperwork, but it also is updating the accounting system at the same time, even though it's not updating this live. Okay, so I'm going to go back into change requests and do another one a little more slowly. And you can specify who you're sending it to, who it's coming from, what the scope is. So it's warning me that this grid, oh, I'd started to enter this one already. This grid is customizable in terms of what it displays. So if you right click anywhere in the header, you can get to hide/show columns. So this is kind of like a big Excel worksheet with a ton of columns, most of which are hidden, because you don't need all of them all the time. So let me create another new one. And when you first come in, you can specify, do I want to work in time and material mode, in which case it'll give you a quantity and a unit price column, or do I want to work in lump sum mode? And then once you've set the mode, in order to control which columns you see and which you don't, they created the notion of things called views. So each of these are presets of which columns are displayed and which columns are hidden. So if you go to the vendor view, it hides most of the columns but shows you the ones related to getting a quote from a vendor. You know, if you're waiting for a quote, what's the due date? If they gave you a quote, what's the quote number? What was the date of their quote? What was the the price that they quoted you. What purchase order or subcontract are we talking about here? Then the system works slightly backwards from the way our brains work, in that, and that one didn't work. Let me do the other one. If you enter a purchase order or subcontract and then enter the price that they quoted you, it will copy that price to the appropriate column. So that was a subcontract. So if my sub quoted me $750, it's copying that as it's going to cost me $750. The way my brain works, and I think a lot of people, is we usually think about what's it going to cost me to do this, and then how much am I going to mark it up to get my price. The way this works is it does price first. And I'm going to switch to the final view so you can see. I need to scroll up here. That there's a column for subcontract price. That's the number I'm going to show my customer. There's a column for subcontract cost. That's the number I'm going to add to my estimate. So this is where we need to know the markup percentage to make those two numbers different.
Right, you wanna mark that 750 up,
Right.
and that's what needs to go in the.
And so there's a button over here called pre-fill estimate. So I typed in the quote, it copied it to the price. I said I'm ready to pre-fill estimate. That copied it to the cost. And so here's where you could say I'm marking this up. You could put a line down here that says markup 15%, and it would do that math for you, but it's doing it globally. Or you could do the math up here and say, you know, my customer is going to pay me $1,000 for this work, but it's costing me $750 is what I'm paying my sub. So you can adjust those numbers in the line item, or you can add a markup down here.
And it still goes in the same place. And
Yes.
shows up the same place and same report.
In terms of the financial reports, yes. In terms of the proposal you give your customer, you can have it look different. So you can either just show them this number and say, hey, this proposal's for $1,000. Or you can show them the number that says, it's $750, I'm marking it up 15. That means it's, and I'm sort of double dipping here because I'm putting 1,000 and then adding 15%. So you can control how this form looks, but regardless of whether you add the dollars up here or down here, it'll show up the same in the cost report. And this is where you can set it up per job ahead of time in the change management system to say,
Just show us what.
you know, I'm doing a 15% on subs and I'm doing 10% on labor, and so that you don't have to go adjust those numbers. That you can say, here's all my expected costs, and then it will add the appropriate percentage for subcontracts, the appropriate percentage for materials. Labor is a little trickier. You'd probably need to enter your, and depending on how you're tracking it, you might not know what your actual labor costs are, so you'd be tracking your billable labor rates anyway, if you're proposing a change. So kind of the way they design this is you start with the vendor view to identify the vendors, put in your cost codes, then the numbers flow through to the price view of what are you going to charge the customer, and then you can copy them over to the cost view, and then use this other view as sort of a double check. And again, it's all the same sheet. It's just we're changing the presets of which columns we're looking at and which columns we're hiding so that we can see the relevant information and we're not scrolling back and forth all the time. Some people have one view with everything and they like to scroll back and forth. Some people like flipping through the views. So, you know, again, it's not right or wrong. This is just how it works, and you can decide how you want to use it. And then same thing, that within each of the view, there's also a setting for the lower grid. So you can control which columns you see in the upper grid, which columns you see in the lower grid. So there's 8 total views. There's the T&M version of vendor price cost other, and then there's a lump sum version of vendor price cost other. And unfortunately, we cannot globally set those up. That is set up per user, per workstation. So as you each start using change management, you kind of have to set up each of your views
That's
the
actually
way you
good.
want to see them. Well, it's good that it persists. It's bad that we can't give you a starting point. It's like I can't say I want you to start with the same view I have and then you're allowed to tweak it from there. It's going to be you get whatever it is out of the box, which I guess the only problem is I don't like the way they did it out of the box. So I'd give you some different columns, but once you start using it, you'll see that. So the 2 different choices under this next action button, the pre-fill estimate is the copy the numbers from price to cost. So if it's in subcontract price, put it in subcontract cost. If it's in material price, put it in material cost. If it's in labor price, put it in labor cost. Because a lot of people, one of the complaints of a lot of people who don't understand how this was designed to work is, oh, I have to enter everything twice. Well, the system needs everything entered twice. One, so you know what you're going to spend, and one, so you know what you're going to bill. But you don't literally have to type everything in twice. If you type everything into the price column, it will copy it for you to the cost column. And then the other choice, the update job estimate, that is if you are planning to proceed with the work before you get the owner change order in hand, this is what lets you issue the cost side, which is not going to work because I didn't enter cost codes yet. So this is what we would do for an internal change order, or if it's work that we're proceeding with even though we don't have the owner change order yet. So we can manually say, I want to issue the cost side as an approved estimate change right now, even though I haven't entered the owner change order yet. So we always want to do that when it's internal because we're never going to get an owner change order for our internal stuff. As you said, it's bad practice to do it when you're waiting for the owner change order, but it is possible. And if you don't do it, when you do get the owner change order, it will process the estimate change for your cost and the contract change for the contract at the moment you enter the owner change order. So is that all making sense to everybody? And on this detail tab, there's a bunch of stuff you can enter for tracking. The only thing I tend to care about is this checkbox that says internal. So when you are creating internal changes, and we talked about the trick to number them differently so that it won't mess up the list. That checking that internal box means it won't show up on the log that your owner sees if your owner asks for a change request log. You can print one that doesn't include the internal ones. So we want everything in one log so that you guys can print your change request log and see everything. But we also want to be able to say, print the version that I can hand to the owner, so don't include the internal stuff. Right. You know, and it's less useful for the type of work you're doing, but there are cases where, you know, you've sent the owner 20 proposals and he's only answered 3 of them. And the owner says, what are all the proposals you're waiting for again? Then you can print out that list of here's what I've sent you, here's what you've gotten back to me on, here's what you haven't. And so then when the owner approves it, you can go into the owner change order screen. And because we've already entered all the details, all we have to do is press this button that says select the change requests. And it will show you all the change requests that aren't already approved. So you can pick one or more of the change requests to add as line items. And then you can also say, where are we going to bill this? So again, we're sort of mixing our example here because we set this up as a T&M not to exceed, but we're acting like this is a contract job. And if you want to bill each change order as its own line item, and this numbering scheme doesn't really support that very well, you can then enter a new number and add it to your scheduled values on the fly. So if you want to say, line item 1 is main contracts, line item 11 is change order 1, 12 is change order 2, 13 is change order 3, or however you do your numbering. Instead of going over to the contracts module and say, I want to add another line item to my scheduled values, you can just do it right here and say, we're going to bill this on its own line item. So that will add that to the contract. And then when you save it, the price goes to the contract under whatever line item you told it to, and the cost goes to the estimate to update your estimate. An important thing to be aware of is, and I'm changing it from approved back to pending so that I can make edits, is if I go back into this change request, I'll see that because I told it to go against schedule values line item number 9, that if I look at my columns that include the contract number, that I'm going to see that every line item in this change is now against contract number, line item number 9. Which, if you want to globally apply everything to the same line item, that works great. If you wanted to do this line item as part of labor, but this line item is part of material, you can also manually assign them one at a time. So by assigning it here, it copies that number into all the blank spots and sort of globally does it. But almost everywhere Timberline does stuff like that, it does it as a pre-fill, which is it fills in a blank spot, not as a link. So if I come back later and say, well, it used to be 9, but now I'm changing it to 1, guess what? All the places where it copied that 9, it's still 9. It's not a live link to say it used to be 9, now I'm changing it to 1. It says, I will fill in any blank spots, but if it's not blank, it must be there for a reason, so I'm not going to change it. So if you assign it to the wrong line item and save it, it's a little more work to fix it. Or if you want to manually link them to each line, you can go in line by line. So it makes it really easy to globally do it the first time through, which is terrific. But if you do it wrong, it's a few more steps to make the change. So you guys will probably never see that because you're never going to code anything wrong. And then again, the third piece is the commitment change order. So you can either pick a sub and then say, are there any sub or purchase order? And then say, are there any line items pending for that sub? Or when you first come into the screen and it's still blank, you can say, show me all the line items that are out there so I can see if I owe anybody a change order. And I can't pick both of these to say, I'm going to issue a change order to 2 subs at once. But if there were multiple issues that each affected my sprinkler contractor, I could issue one subcontract change order that pulls all those issues in. So in this example, there's only one here, so I only have one to issue. But I could have multiple line items here. It says scope change 1 and scope change 3 both involve that same sub. I only have to give that sub one change order if I want to. And it's also good for things like back charges. If you have a back charge that you want to get somebody to sign, it's always easier when you're giving them additional scope to just have them both be on there as two different line items. Gets them to sign the paperwork faster. And then you can also, again, fill in who is this going to, who's it coming from, what's the scope of work, so that when you actually print out this subcontract change order, it will have all that information. And when I'm using the system for real, I always use the transmittal button over here. Not because anyone needs a transmittal cover sheet anymore, because we send everything by email these days, but because by doing that, I can press save and then send. Timberline will generate the email for me, and the fact that I pressed transmittal and then save, I also added an entry to my transmittal log, so that if there's ever a question later, I can go back to my transmittal log to say, what did I send to whom and when? You know, the subset, I never got that change order. I can open up my transmittal log. That was sent to you on this date. And so this is the sending screen where it says, I'm going to send this to Barry Jones. And again, since this isn't a real system, I don't have things set up. But ideally, you'll have everybody's email address and have them default to email. So it'll say, I'm going to email them the change order form. And then this is the email subject line and the email message. So you can just press send. Oh. And I said I want to send it via email, but there was no email address. So Timberline will generate the PDFs of the forms. It will create the email template, and it will put that in your Outlook. Well, it will send the email and then put that in your Outlook sent items folder. It does create a virus warning. There's a third-party utility called Click Yes that will get rid of that warning. So I personally hate this, that after I press send, it doesn't really send until I come back here and say allow. So I usually use that utility so that you don't think you generated a document, but you didn't really. So this is now sitting in my outbox because I haven't done a send receive, so it didn't actually make it to my sent items. But it created the email. Here's who it's going to. That's the email subject line I typed, the message body.
And whoever's on the receiving end will be able to open that.
So they'll get this email, which has these two PDFs in it, one of which is the transmittal cover sheet, and the other of which, in this case, is the subcontract. The thing that's a little bit confusing is the way they set it up is each recipient gets their own email. So if you send it to 3 people, there's not going to be one email addressed to 3 people. There's going to be 3 emails, each addressed to one person. So it is what it is. And so this is just the transmittal cover sheet, which again, nobody really uses these a lot anymore. Back when you used to throw things on the fax machine, we use these all the time. But so this form doesn't get me anything, but the fact that I created it means that now I can go run my transmittal log report. And so every time you enter a commitment, You can press the transmittal button, create an entry that you're sending out a subcontractor or purchase order. Every time you do an RFI, every time you do a change request, every time you do a sub-change order. I just push that button every time so that it builds your transmittal log for you of here's what you sent out.
It's kinda nice to do our purchase orders that way and actually use that ship to box with the ship to address and
Right.
I can quit typing all that crap in the email and actually before you get away from, once you're done talking about, actual change orders to jobs, I wanna go back over making changes to purchase orders,
Okay.
especially after invoices are
Okay.
entered. But then I could transmittal that purchase order to the vendor and just say, here's your PO, CP address and the ship to, and
Right.
away we go.
Right. So, I think I'm done talking about change orders unless there's questions or you want to see something again.
You done looking at
Yeah, I'm
job
good.
change orders?
I'm good with change orders. Change orders, I don't have a problem with it.
Alright, so, sometimes on material purchase orders, pipe especially will come in, you'll get invoiced for a foot or two more than they originally quoted you, just because of how it ships. Sometimes there might be additional freight you weren't aware of, or taxes increased because of freight and additional pipe. You need to go back in that purchase order and make changes, after an invoice has already been, tagged to that PO and AP. You can't change it in the purchase order screen anymore, you have to go to the commitment change orders. And,
That is correct.
okay, I've been teaching myself how to do that, I'd like to see your way of doing it. And then, of course, I would love if I could reprint my purchase order form and see those changes, but I don't think that's possible. We've called Timberline and tried to talk to them over the phone about it, and either we
Yeah.
aren't understanding each other, or it's not an option.
No, so what we'll do is from the menu, you'll just go, so you'll go do the data entry. I'm going to enter a purchase order. I'm going to enter my subcontract. I'm going to push the transmittal button to add it to the log. Then I'm going to go to my menu and say print out my form. So if it's a subcontract, you'd print it on your subcontract form.
Right.
And these are the whole menus of all the huge variety of things that are built into the system, some of which are really useful and some of which are completely not.
I even have a few more because we've customized our own.
Right. So again, this is where I find Sage Desktop helpful because we can say, these are the 3 reports we want you to use. This is the one you should push that will print it out on the form we want you to print it on.
I like that.
So you'll either come to a shortcut that says print out my subcontract or print out my purchase order. Or if you know the secret handshake, you can go to the reports menu and go to the one that you want. Say I need to reprint purchase order 40001. And then if we want something that will say original revised, we can add that onto the form if you want to be able to print it after changes and
Might be
show
able to
that.
do that, yeah. 'Cause generally those changes are pretty minute, but, I actually send my purchase orders along for one of my clients as my backup, and I would like them to be able to see that final revised document.
Okay.
So,
Good cheer.
yes,
Very good spot.
okay,
All right.
alright. Well, is it possible that we can simulate putting an invoice